I appreciate everybody coming out. I assume there's somebody out there I can't really even see with these bright lights. But I'm always looking for a reason to come to Cache Valley. I love Cache Valley. So it's nice to be up here with you tonight, and I hope that something I say tonight will be meaningful and that when you leave you'll feel like your time was well spent here. And when I'm done with my comments, there'll be an opportunity for some questions, and hopefully I can get you a good answer. If I don't know the real answer, I'll make one up. So a couple of things. I thought it might be nice to just share a little bit about myself so you can kind of understand my background and the context of how I see the world. I was born in Salt Lake City in 1966, so I'm 49 years old. And I lived in Utah. I've lived in Utah all of my life except for a 9-year period from the time I was 4 to the time I was 13 when we moved to Colorado. And then as Bailey said, from the time I was 13 on, we lived in Utah and I was working in the family business. I'm the oldest of my parents' 5 children. They have 4 boys and a girl. And we're all in Utah, the surviving ones. I lost a brother a couple of years ago, but my 2 brothers and my sister are all in Utah, and we stay in fairly close contact. Right now, we live in Sandy, Utah, and Heidi and I live there with my beautiful wife, Heidi, who's here with me. And Heidi and I have been married for 29 years, and we have 6 kids, 3 boys and 3 girls. The 3 oldest are married, and our 2 oldest are daughters, and each of them have two children of their own. So Heidi and I have 4 grandchildren. And our youngest son, Oakley, just left for a mission, an LDS mission to Portland, Oregon. We dropped him off at the MTC a week ago yesterday. And so we're down to 1 child at home. That's Sabrina, and she's a junior at Alta High School. And she's involved in student government and very active socially, and she's a wonderful daughter. She's kind of our paycheck baby after some of the experiences the others gave us. When I'm not working, I love spending time with my family. There's nothing I love more than being with my family, but I also love to travel, and I've been privileged to visit all 7 continents, and I've been to about 40 countries. And one of my favorite travel adventures was a global adventure that I was able to wrap up last September, almost a year ago, where we were able to drive the same vehicle, a Toyota Land Cruiser, on all 7 continents. And that was a big project, and it was a really neat experience for me in a lot of ways. I could talk about just that one event all night, but I think the neatest takeaway for me, one of the neatest, was that I was able to involve every member of my family on some segment of the journey, some in multiples, but overall there were 50 different people that participated in the journey at some point. I also love to hunt. That's one of the reasons that I love Cache Valley. Most of you probably know we have a little place just north of us, and I love to be up there whenever I can. Our family's getting big enough that we have to really plan ahead these days in order to schedule it. I'm not very good at planning that far ahead, so I don't get up here as much as I'd like. But the other thing that I love is what I call the sport of business. And if you think about business, I know many of you are in your own business. It is a pretty dramatic thing, and you never know what the next day is going to bring, and there's a lot of drama in terms of acquisitions, divestitures, mergers, market shifts, employee changes, etc. And I really love that. I thrive on that. So one thing that I've learned from speaking opportunities like this is that people really seem to enjoy the story about how I met my wife Heidi. And it all started when I was at Harvard getting my MBA, and if you guys know me, there's no truth to that at all. It actually happened when I was cruising State Street in a little red Toyota pickup that was the most basic model, 4-wheel drive. It had the white steel wheels and the brown vinyl interior. and I was with my friend named Eric, and we were just driving north on State Street, about 27th South, where that Reams is, if you're familiar with Salt Lake. And we looked over, and there was this really cute girl riding shotgun with her friend Susan in a little brown Mustang too. It's probably the ugliest car I've ever seen to this day. And we started talking, and we pulled over, and I got her phone number, and I still have that piece of paper that says Heidi 4668395. And I put it up on the windshield with all the other little tabs with girls' phone numbers that we had. And I tried a couple times later. I thought she was really cute, so I tried calling her, and this was obviously way before cell phones. And we had a hard time connecting. She'd return my call, and I wasn't there. And so after several tries each direction, we just kind of gave up. And it was probably, 2, 3, 4 weeks later, I was down on State Street again, and I was with my same friend, Eric, in the same truck, in the same exact place, going the same direction, and I looked over, and there was a little brown Mustang too, and it was Heidi and her friend Susan driving the car. And so this time we pulled over in what's ironically now Ken Garf's Honda parking lot, and we chatted. At the time it was still Grand Central, and we chatted and really hit it off, and so we made a little more concerted effort to get together after that, and shortly thereafter we had our first date, which was a Chuck Norris movie at Fashion Place Mall, and wound up married about a year and a half after that, and I can tell you that they've been 29 wonderful years for me, and I'm privileged to be her husband. And the takeaway from there for me is, and I don't mean this to sound disrespectful or flippant, but it is that God is looking out for us, and in situations where maybe we're a little bit slower to learn what He wants, like was the case with me, He is sometimes willing to say, listen, knucklehead, I'm going to give you one more chance, and luckily I got a second chance with her, and like I said, it's been great ever since. I was asked, Bailey asked me to talk a little bit about why Cache Valley, why do we have a place here, what's our connection to this area, and it's not just the property that we own north of here, but in fact, my maternal grandparents had ties here, and my grandpa, Joseph Herman Saxton, lived here in what would probably be, I would say, the 20s or 30s. And he ran the drugstore that used to be at 22 West Oneida, which is, I think, by my best estimate, is where the driveway is now between Wells Fargo and Bailey's real estate office. And my grandma lived in Montpelier, and they would often make the journey to see each other. And so we actually have family ties here, and also the Sidaway branch. There's probably some relation to the Sidaways who are from this area, are also in my ancestral line. And I didn't realize that probably until, several years after we had the property up here, or at least we were involved with the property up here. But I always have felt an affinity for this part of the world, and when I learned that I had ancestors who lived here, maybe that kind of helped explain it in my mind. And it really is a neat place. I can tell you, having traveled around the world, and as much as I've been privileged to, that there is something really special about Cache Valley and all the communities from Smithfield all the way up to Downey. There's just a neat feel here, and I don't know if you all experience this, perhaps you may, but it's really mind-boggling to me how often I run into somebody, it could be in New York or Chicago, or it doesn't matter, but faraway places that have ties to Preston, Idaho. Not just Logan, but Preston, Idaho. And it really is remarkable. I'll bet it happens probably three or four times a year. So, in 1985, my dad he received an invitation to come up and go fishing on the property that the Boson family owned, and really enjoyed it. And one thing led to another, and we got involved with the Bosons and got to know them. And through a series of events, we we wound up with that place, and we've loved it ever since. And we have, to this day, I consider David Bozen one of my best friends. And as a matter of fact, just to illustrate that, I can tell you that when I was filling out my application to serve as governor on the NBA Board of Governors for the Utah Jazz, I listed David as a reference, a character reference. And I think he was pretty good to me, so I appreciate that, David, because I passed the test. Let's see. Also, I was asked to talk a little bit about my career, and I won't wear you out, but I've had the opportunity to serve in a lot of different capacities. I remember my first day of work, driving to work with my dad down 13th East on the way to the Toyota store in Murray, and he was explaining to me how he wanted the Larry Miller plastic logos on the trunk lid of every car on the lot. And once I had that all taken care of, he wanted me to go into the parts department, get with the parts manager, and he would show me where the broom was, and I could sweep the floor there in the lot outside. And I just remember that was a long day. It was the first time I'd spent the whole day working. And then from that point on, I spent a lot of time working in our parts department, primarily at the Toyota store. I did a lot of data input, and then I sold cars at our Toyota store. Then I was involved, I started a business with my dad that was a chemical and printing distribution company that sold chemicals and printed materials to our dealerships. And then after that, I ran that for 3 years, and I started to get bored with it because I wasn't learning, and I said, Dad, what's next? And he said, I'll have to get with you later. I'm busy building an arena. And that took a long time, and after about a year of waiting, I finally said, man, I got to do something else. So for that reason, and also largely driven by the fact that I didn't want to grow up in my dad's shadow forever, I decided to leave the family business and go out and start my own business, which I did for just under 3 years, which was a graphics company, and it was a great experience for me, but I knew I didn't want to make a career out of it. So I wound up selling it to my employees and coming back to the family business. My first assignment when I got back was with KJazz Television. After that, I worked with the Salt Lake Golden Eagles International Hockey League, obviously hockey team. And then I had an opportunity to get involved. We sold that hockey team, so I had the opportunity to get involved with some construction management of our dealerships. And I really loved that because it was a lot of moving parts and a lot of coordination and different personalities. But as much as any of that, I could see tangible progress every day of the work being done. And so I did that for a few years, and then I did a couple of other just sort of odds and ends project type work. And in 1995, we started 4 new businesses all at once, a couple of used car operations and a couple of finance operations, which I was responsible for making those work, and did that for a few years. And then I had the opportunity to run my first new car franchise, which was Stockton to Malone Honda. And that was a great opportunity for me for a lot of reasons. And I ran that. It was a brand new startup. I was there when the first load of cars came in on the transport. And did that for about 3.5 years. And then I had the best opportunity that I'd had to that point, which was to go back and become the general manager of the Toyota store that started it all in Murray, Utah. It was the store my dad bought when in May of '79 when he became self-employed. And that was a real honor and a real privilege for me, and I had a great time running that for about 4 years. And during this period of running the Honda store and the Toyota store, there were 3 times when my dad said to me, where he'd lean forward to make sure I was paying attention, and he'd put his finger in my face and he'd say, "You running a car dealership is a luxury this family and this organization can't afford." And I thought, man, I'm doing a pretty good job running the store. I'm not sure what you're not happy with. And it took the 3rd time over the course of a few years before I realized that he was saying that I've got bigger things in mind for you. I need you to come and start learning what I think you need to know to be ready to take the business over when I'm not in charge anymore. And so 4 years into my run at the Toyota store, I finally turned it over to my number 2 guy and went to the management company, which is the headquarters, Larry H. Miller Management. And I was really excited to be able to take that next step in my career. But I will tell you that it was the most frustrating year of my career ever, because my dad, for those of you who knew him, knew that he was the classic entrepreneur, and he wanted to do everything himself. He wanted to control every aspect of every business, and he wasn't very good at delegating and giving assignments. But I still had the privilege to sit across the desk from him and just listen to him work deals, and I did learn a lot from that. But the way I characterized this year of my career was, even though it was a great opportunity to learn from one of the best businessmen, I think, who ever lived, it was still frustrating in that it was purely spectator. And if you liken it to learning how to play a guitar, it would be like Eddie Van Halen being willing to teach you how to play guitar. And so you show up at his house for your first lesson, and he says, "Come on in, have a seat." And then he explains to you, here's the body of the guitar, here's the neck, here's the frets, these are the strings, here's the whammy bar. And if you want to play an E chord, you hold your fingers like this and do this, and good things happen. And it'd be like saying, "Okay, great, let me try," and having him say, No. You just sit in that chair and watch me play for 10 or 12 hours a day, and eventually you'll pick up on it. And it just, after a few months, it really started to wear on me, and after a year, I just was going crazy. And I said to my dad, "Listen, I've got to have more than this, and if you don't trust me to take on more, or you're not ready for me to, or for whatever reason, you're unwilling to give me more, I'm fine with that. Just tell me now so I can go out and do my own thing, because I can't just sit and not be making a productive contribution." And so it was at that point that he let me get involved with Miller Motorsports Park, and I was involved with the launch of that and running that. But that was a little bit awkward, because he'd already hired a guy to run it who wasn't doing a very good job, and he kind of put me out there to do damage control, but not with clear definition of authority. And so it was a little awkward, but I did the best I could. And then a couple years after that was when I became CEO, and that was a great opportunity for me. And I was able to be CEO for about 7 months before my dad passed. And the things that I'm thankful for were all the time that I was able to spend with my dad. Particularly, it seemed like time got sweeter for me. My time with my dad got sweeter the closer it got to his death. And we didn't know exactly when he was going to pass, but in hindsight, we could see that the days were richer as we got closer to the end. And it was really too bad that we couldn't have had that richness throughout our lives together. But I'm thankful for that, and I'm also thankful that he took the steps that he did while he was alive to define the structure of the organization and who was going to be in control. Not necessarily that I was the guy in charge, but just that he named the one in charge, so that wasn't something that I had to sort out with my siblings or other executives. And if I could be bold enough to offer one piece of counsel to any of you who are considering your estate plan, it would be to consider the decisions that you have to make from the perspective of your heirs, and do what you can to clarify the path so that they can spend their time perpetuating your life's work rather than arguing over who gets what in court. Just the more clarity you can offer them, the more blessed you will leave them. And that was the case with my dad, at least to a large degree. So maybe a couple of stories. That's my career in a nutshell. Oh, actually, maybe I should just tell you that as Bailey mentioned, I stepped down in March of this year, and that was for a number of reasons. One is that the organization is a big company now. It was a big company when I took it, and it's a much bigger company now. I learned yesterday that we're 24 employees shy of 11,000 employees. We'll sell 120,000 cars this year. We'll have 8.5 million people come through our theaters, and there's just a lot going on. And my parents' vision was to see the organization succeed for 100 years after their passing. And while my dad was comfortable in his ability to run it, and evidently in my ability to run it, it's pretty hard to ensure that a single personality will emerge that will keep that operation running at the healthy levels that it is. So as a family, we decided it was time to bite the bullet and formalize the structure and implement a board of directors and create a family governance plan after we created the corporate governance plan and before we create a family office, and that will set the table for the succession plan to be in effect where the assets transfer to the next owners. And so all of those big high-level things were probably the primary force in the decision. But I also got to a point where if any of you, I'm sure many of you work in a family business, so you'll appreciate it when I say that what my brother says is very relevant. And his quote is, "Family is hard, business is hard, and family business is really, really hard." And that became more and more true as time went on. And I love my brothers and I love my mom, and we get along quite well. But I just realized one day that in order for me to continue my growth and evolution as a person and as a businessman, I was going to need to unplug as CEO and get to a space where I could spread my wings even more and continue to take on new challenges and new opportunities and just kind of run. I'm not one who does well in a confined environment, and I didn't really know how well how it was going to work out with the board of directors that I had to report to, and so I just figured that now's probably a good time to make a turn, make a change. And so I have a couple of things that I've been working on. Since I stepped down 5 months ago, I've taken the opportunity to schedule some meetings with people that I haven't known. I've just known a little bit about them, very successful people from industries that I know nothing about, and just buy them a cheeseburger and say, "Teach me what you do." And it's been fascinating for me, and I've made a lot of neat friendships, and I've strengthened, kind of dusted off some other friendships, and I've learned a lot about some different businesses, and it's helped me sort through this process, and I've got a pretty clear idea of what I want the next chapter of my life to be, and I'm working aggressively on that. And with any luck, I'll be able to make an announcement within the next few months about some big ideas and big plans that I'm working on. And I honestly believe that if they come to fruition, it will be the next step in my career, and it will allow me to continue to do big things and implement big ideas that help a lot of people. So maybe from that I'll transition into the evolution of the Larry Miller Group, and it all started with that Toyota store in May of '79, a single-point store, and from there my dad started buying other dealerships, and after he had a handful of dealerships, he realized that there were a number of products and services that he was paying third-party vendors for, such as service contracts and leasing and buildings, real estate, and so on. So he started what the Wall Street guys call vertical integration, and started companies that provided these products and services to himself, many of which required very little capital to start up. And so having a built-in customer base and even at market rate profit margins, he was able to build cash very quickly. And in fact, those companies have saved the organization on more than one occasion during downturns. And my dad was always quick to say that those what we call ancillary businesses were largely responsible for his ability to buy the Jazz. And so they were all pretty much automotive related. And then, as you all know, I don't remember the month. I want to say April of '85, but I know it was in '85. He bought the first half of the Jazz, and it's mind-boggling to me to look at the timeline. That was 6 years after he bought his first dealership, and the way he tells the story, he had a very short time frame because there was an offer on the table from a group out of Minnesota. They'd made an offer to Sam Battistone to buy the team and move it to Minnesota, at least Sam's half, and move it to Minnesota. And so he went to work. He just felt very strongly, if you've read the book or heard him talk, that if the Jazz got out of Salt Lake City, there'd never be an opportunity to replace them, at least in our lifetime, as he said it. So with his love and my mom's love for the community, they just said, we got to find a way to do this. And so he would say that he had something like 3 weeks to borrow $8 million against an asset that had lost millions of dollars, and the $8 million was far in excess of his net worth at the time, and this was all to be done with a consortium of 4 different banks. And he found a way to do it. And that's a pretty remarkable story, and I didn't even come close to doing it justice, but it just demonstrated his ability to just will things to be. So then the next year he bought the second half because the group came back and said, well, now we want to buy the other half, and so again he had to protect the first investment. So he found a way to raise $14 million the second time around. And it was a little easier because he had a track record, but it was still a pretty Herculean task. So now he's got a basketball team and learning that the industry of basketball, and the new collective bargaining agreement comes along. And for those of you who don't know what that is, that's the agreement between the players' union and the owners on what benefits and what pay the players are going to receive. And there was a huge jump in the salary cap that year that would have required, without building a new building, of course we were in the Salt Palace at the time, it would have meant something like that a $25 ticket would have had to jump like 10 times, $240, $250, which is a lot of money now, let alone back then. And so he knew that wasn't feasible, that the answer was to spread the cash demands out over more seats and more fans and more suites and more sponsorship opportunities. And so he bit the bullet again and decided to build the arena. And so the thing that I didn't mention is in between that, there was a deal with KSTU, Channel 13, that where the Jazz would go and buy a 3-hour block, might have been 2.5-hour block, and then they would just pay flat rate for that, and then they would go and sell the commercials during that time and broadcast the Jazz game, and it actually became a profit center. And once KSTU found out what the Jazz were doing, they wanted, of course, to grab those advertising dollars, and so their theory was if they jacked the price of the 2.5-hour block up enough that they could coerce my dad into just complying with that. So when they told him what the new rate was, he wasn't very happy with it, and they said, well, Larry, you really don't have any other options. And that's when he went out and bought his own TV station, KJazz TV. And so we've got the franchise, the Jazz, the TV station, and now we've got the arena. So it's not that he ever set out to be a pro sports owner or an arena owner or in the broadcasting industry, but those entities all complemented each other very nicely at the time. And of course, with the regional sports networks and the national cable deals now, the independent TV stations they've kind of gone the way of the dinosaur. But it worked at the time, and those entities then spun off other entities like a catering company. We have 3 million people a year that come through our arena, and so a lot of them want to eat, so it made sense to get in the food business. And then we got in the radio business, and then we got in the bike race business, and we got in the baseball business. And the reason we got in the baseball business is again, because my dad loved baseball, and he loved baseball at Dirks Field. But also there was a business reason, and that is that the seasons complemented each other, and it was a great way to keep the part-time help employed throughout the year, or at least largely throughout the year. And so there sort of became this separate group that we call Sports and Entertainment. And then later, when when we kind of had our house in order, we had the idea that we could give ourselves a competitive advantage by starting our own subprime finance company that would be able to finance customers who had a little shakier credit than the banks wanted, and we could get deals approved that our competitive dealers couldn't and garner greater market share. So we started a company called Prestige Financial Services. And it's interesting that now that business has grown up to where it's a huge company, but only about 3% of the loans they originate are from Larry Miller dealerships. And that's where, when you hear 46 states across the country, most of that is from loan originations at dealerships outside the Larry Miller Group. So it's just been one of those things where we just keep looking for opportunities, and we don't jump on every opportunity. Some we decide aren't for us. Others we decide we want to try, and then get a real lesson in how they're not. We shouldn't be in that industry, so we get out of it. But it's just basics. It's just going to work and executing the fundamentals as well as they can be executed. And just sticking with it. And of course, there are the other things that you hear about: making sure you have the right people in the right places, doing the right things at the right time, and being honest, and providing service, and being price, service, and quality competitive, and so on. But all of those fundamental things are really all we've ever done as an organization and as a family, is what we've tried to do. And so the results have been pretty good. But there's no secret sauce, there's no magic formula other than that. So maybe a couple of stories to illustrate my dad's frugality. And these were all things that just made me shake my head. But there was a time, probably close to, I'd say, 15, 20 years ago now, when the whole family was in a meeting. And it's pretty hard to get us all around the table now, and it was back then as well. But we had these directors meetings for our insurance company, and every quarter we'd have to meet in order to comply with the state insurance examiner's regulations. So my dad sat at one end of the table, and I sat opposite him on the other end. My mom sat to his right, and then my siblings sat in the chairs that were left. And whenever there were documents to sign, that we all needed to sign, this was a very convenient time. So there was usually a stack of folders with each one of us had a pink color, or a different colored tab, like my mom would be pink and I'd be red and so on. And so the documents would, after the board of directors meeting, the documents would get passed around the table and we'd all take turns signing. And there was one time that we all signed and the documents were stacked up next to my mom as my dad was giving us updates on different business things. And he was in mid-sentence one time talking about something, and he looked down at my mom, and he saw her folding up one of those little sign here sticky tabs. I'm sure you've all seen them. And he stopped mid-sentence, and he grabbed it out of her hand, and he unfolded it. He said, "Gail, we reuse those." And he unfolded it and put it back on the paper, and that was a great lesson in frugality. There was another time that when we were building the arena, we had a meeting with the architects, and the city was there, and a lot of the stakeholders were in this meeting. And after the meeting, we wanted to go to a little place called Siegfried's Delicatessen in Salt Lake. And as we were driving up to Siegfried's, there was a parking place right in front of the door to Siegfried's, and he slows down and he goes like this, and he looks over at it, and he keeps driving. And I said, "Did you change your mind?" And he said, "No, I'm just going to keep driving until I find a meter with some time left on it." And so we wound up parking at the other side of the block and walking around, and we probably spent 100 times that 23 cents that we saved on the meter with the time it took to walk. And then there was another time when we were in line at a burger joint called Astro Burger, not far from the dealerships. And he used to like to go to lunch with a lot of his guys, so there were 8 or 10 of us there that day, and we're all standing in line, and the routine was that we'd all order, and then my dad would order last and pay. And he's standing right behind me, and I said, "I'll take a hamburger with bacon." And my dad leans forward and he said, "That bacon cost 85 cents. And so I said, "Okay, hold the bacon." He said, No, you should get the bacon." I said, "Dad, for 85 cents, I'm not going to put you through it." And so that was one of the few arguments I ever won with him, by not having bacon on my hamburger that day. But he was very, very frugal until the day he died. And I love that about him. It's a great lesson. He once told me that the most expensive thing he bought for himself that year was a $70 softball mitt, whatever year that was. He wore a $100 watch, he wore Levi's, and he wore free tennis shoes that he'd get through the Jazz. And those Jazz shirts, and I just thought it was really cool that he would be that frugal when he didn't have to be. So I've also been asked to talk a little bit about my mindset through the downturn. As I said, I became CEO on July 16th of 2008. And we track our car sales daily throughout the group. And I can show you the most graphic graph you've probably ever seen. On September 8th, 2008, somebody turned off the switch and America quit buying cars because the line just went like this. So it was 2 months after less than 2 months after I became CEO, that things got really ugly really fast. And so I had been fortunate in my career to have a mentor by the name of Ed Mansfield, who's probably had as much influence on my business outlook as anybody, including my dad. And Ed was a real expense control freak, and so I just went into survival mode. And that next year, 2009, we cut $29 million of expense out of our organization, and that came, unfortunately, through some layoffs. We had to lay off about 1 in 7 of our employees, and we started with the shortest tenure and least critical, and just we went as slowly as we could. But I looked at it as a matter of survival, and I remember somebody telling me a story once about how when they were in a position they actually worked at Bain & Company, the consulting company, and they went into Firestone, and they were asked to help revitalize Firestone, and the recommendation was to lay off 30,000 of the 70,000 employees. And this person was asked, how can you live with yourself knowing that you laid off 30,000 people and many of them are going to lose their houses and so on? And he said, I don't take any solace in those that lost their jobs, but I take a lot of satisfaction in knowing that 40,000 people get to keep their jobs and that the company will survive. And it's the worst thing I've had to do, other than firing family members that haven't performed. Laying people off is the worst thing I've had to do, but we did get to the point where we were able to rehire many, if not all, who wanted to come back eventually. But there was that. There was cutting out all unnecessary waste. There was trimming our inventory. At the time, our new car inventory was $270 million. We cut it down to $130 million. Used car inventories were contracted. We collected our receivables better. We tightened up credit. I mean, there was no stone in the organization that we left unturned in terms of how can we optimize this facet of the business. And luckily it worked, and we were able to survive. Part of that, I mean, I certainly don't mean to imply that I take credit for it. I inherited a very good situation. We were well capitalized. We had a lot of good people who did a lot of hard things to make it work, but we just banded together and, again, executed the basics, and we were able to hang on another day and another day and another day, and eventually things turned around. My dad used to say that if it ever gets to the point where we're all selling apples on the corner, I can guarantee I'm going to sell more apples than you are. And that was kind of the mindset that we had. The succession plan, it's another thing I've been asked to touch on. I mentioned it a little bit when I was talking about how pleased and how thankful I was that my dad added definition. The succession part is a really difficult, complex, challenging part of any business, particularly a family business. And there is no one-size-fits-all. I think the things that I've learned over the last 7 years are that I believe, first of all, every business that ever exists will eventually be sold for one reason or another, either by choice or compulsion, or, I guess those pretty much cover every reason. But I think, especially if you're in the agricultural business, I had a tree farm once. That's as close as I got to the agricultural business. But I think it's easy to get emotionally attached to your business. And what I will do with my kids as I develop the estate plan is I will set the business up to be sold. And my and Heidi's approach will be to give our kids opportunity and design a business that will be able to foster the needs of our kids by creating opportunity for them, but it can be done separately. And if they choose to stay together and work together as a family, that's by choice, not by compulsion. And too often I think the business is used as the glue to try to hold the family together, and that's, to me, it's really lousy family glue. And so that's, I know I kind of sound like I'm rambling there, but those are my prevailing thoughts relative to succession planning and estate planning right now, because I'm right in a seam. I can see my mom's challenges from her side and what she's going to do with all of her stuff. And I see, I want to take care of my kids. I don't want to make them lazy. I want to make sure they earn everything they get. But I don't want them dealing with ambiguity or having turf battles or power battles or any of that kind of stuff. And money does funny things to people. Even great families have challenges when it comes to figuring out how to divvy up the wealth. And so I guess beyond what I've said, I would just encourage you to start now. You can always modify, but don't wait until you're on your deathbed to sort out your estate plan. Involve the right people. Get an attorney that you know and trust. Check their references. Go with people who have worked with them before. If you don't like them, move on to the next one. Get a good attorney and a good accountant and a good tax guy, and involve your family. My feeling is that not just with estate planning, but with any business or with any decision, you're going to make a better decision if you can see it from multiple perspectives. And obviously, in the case of your estate, you are the one that will make the ultimate decision on what happens to your wealth, but you may come across ideas that wouldn't otherwise occur to you if you involve your family, including your spouse, your kids, their spouses. And I mean, you know your situation obviously better than anybody, but you can garner all of that input and you can process it and then you can decide. But do it and do it soon, and then if your circumstances change, you can always modify it. But if you don't decide what happens to your stuff, Uncle Sam and the courts will, and like I said, that's not fair to you and all the work you put in throughout your life. So I was asked to maybe share a couple of stories NBA related, and one of them's a little bit irreverent, but just remember it wasn't me talking when these words were said. My very first NBA meeting as governor, I'm really nervous, so I had my best white shirt, not a wrinkle in it, my best suit, my favorite tie, my shoes are shined, and I'm back there, and I got there way early for the meeting, and I mean, it was kind of silly because they all start very late, so I was just sitting there doing nothing for a long time. But in this particular meeting, it was starting with a buffet lunch. And I got there, I was the first one there, and there was another meeting going on with league executives. And when it broke, I'm standing there, and none of them knew me, but David Stern knew me. And David said, "Oh, Greg, welcome. Come on, let me take you around the room and introduce you to some people." And so I started going around this room where some people had already been seated for lunch. And there was a gentleman by the name of Larry Miller, who was the general manager of the Portland Trail Blazers. And he was about the third person that David introduced me to. And he said, "Greg Miller, I'd like you to meet Larry Miller, the black Larry Miller." This guy was African American, and I just thought, David, did you really just say that? But he was a pretty irreverent guy. He's a great guy, and I love him, and he's brilliant. But he could be real irreverent at times. I think my favorite, well, I can't say my favorite. One of the great experiences that I've had so far at an NBA Board of Governors meeting came when You remember a few years back when LeBron and Chris Bosh and Dwayne Wade sort of conspired, in my opinion, to all go to Miami and chase a championship. And that's their prerogative. They could do that if they want. They can all take less money if they want. But we were just winding up a Board of Governors meeting, and at these meetings there's about 12 league executives that sit across the head table. The commissioner's in the middle, the deputy commissioner sits next to him, and then you've got all the attorneys and other people up there. And then the owners sit around the other three sides of a hollow square. And so we're about 20 feet across and maybe 25 or 30 feet this way. And there's a very structured agenda, and we take a lot longer to go through it than we should, but we get through it. And so the meeting was just starting to wind up, and somebody brought up the issue about, hey, Commissioner, how do you feel? This wasn't on the agenda, so they brought up, hey, Commissioner, how do you feel about what's going on in Miami with Dwayne and Chris and LeBron doing what they're doing there? And David made a couple of comments, and then I should tell you that I was sitting right across from Michael Jordan, who by the way, obviously represents Charlotte, and he was sitting right next to Jerry Reinsdorf, who's the owner of the Bulls. So they have a long-standing relationship. And by the way, they're in alphabetical order. So you had Charlotte, Chicago. That's how the seats are arranged. And so Michael said, let me tell you how I feel about it. He said, when I was playing in the NBA, I could have called Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, and we could have made a deal to have all of us wind up on one team. And Jerry Reinsdorf put his arm on Michael's arm, and he said, well, why didn't you? And like, I would have loved that. I'd have had those guys on my team in a heartbeat if you'd have helped me. And he said, well, why didn't you? And Michael, I'll never forget this, Michael pulled his arm out from under Jerry's arm, and he said, because I came to kick their butt, he didn't say that word, every night. And he said there was an element of competition that I thrived on. And it would have been, it's just what those guys are doing is they're being a bunch of sissies, in my opinion. And I just thought that was incredible to see one of the greatest that ever played, perhaps the greatest, just demonstrate that level of competition. It just showed you how his mind worked outside of a basketball arena. And it was just neat to be in the room when that happened. And so anyway, there have been a lot of other neat moments that I've had in the NBA, but I think we'll just keep moving on. How are we doing on time? 5 more minutes? Okay. I think as I was considering what thought I might share with you that's hopefully more than just an anecdote, something that may be meaningful in the long run. It occurred to me to share with you a sort of one of my core philosophies, and that is that it doesn't matter how nice a home I have or what kind of clothes I wear or what offices I may hold in church or politics or religion or society or anything else. When all is said and done, all that's going to matter is what kind of kids I raised, what kind of person I was. And if I do nothing more in my life than raise 6 well-adjusted children who are happily married and in a position to raise their own well-adjusted children, and I die when I reach that last one, then I think in the long run, that's enough. And so if you expand on that to a higher level, I think it could be said that as human beings, we all have a responsibility to do whatever we can, however insignificant or however large it may be, to enrich the lives of the people we come in contact with. Now that could be paying off a massive debt for someone. It could be a wink and a smile at a time of need. It could be baking a plate of cookies. It could be pulling somebody out of a ditch. We all have different resources available to us, but I assure you that we all have the ability to make somebody else's day brighter. And I'm confident that everybody in this auditorium has been the beneficiary of somebody else making their day brighter when the person who made the day brighter had no idea. It was almost accidental that they brightened our day. And I would submit to you that we all have the ability to have that impact on other people, even if we don't know we're having that impact. And so I would challenge all of you, myself included, all of us, to slow down just a little bit and look for ways that we can help out somebody else, lighten their load, make their day brighter, and leave a legacy of goodness. Thank you.